Today, we are digging into one of Ghana's biggest, most drawn-out legal battles ever. We're talking about a 7-year trial that hit the heart of the country's most important industry, involved hundreds of millions of cedis, and threw around accusations of corruption at the absolute highest levels. And the way it ended? Well, it wasn't with a bang. It was more like the entire case just vanished. So let's get into it.
To really get this story, you have to start with this saying. And look, it's not just some catchy phrase for a tourism brochure. It is the fundamental truth of the nation, both economically and culturally. Cocoa isn't just another crop. It's literally the lifeblood of Ghana.
And because cocoa is Ghana, the organization that runs the show, the Ghana Cocoa Board, or COCOBOD, wields an incredible amount of power. I mean, what happens inside COCOBOD doesn't just stay in a boardroom, it ripples out and affects hundreds of thousands of families across the country.
Okay, let's try to put that power into perspective with a number. $2 billion. That's roughly the amount of foreign exchange that cocoa brings into Ghana every single year. It is a massive, massive pillar of the entire national economy.
And what's so wild is when you break that number down, you can see it right here. Cocoa makes up nearly a third of all the country's export earnings. It employs almost a fifth of the entire working population. And it's a huge slice of the national GDP. So you can see why, when an institution this important gets hit with a scandal, the stakes are about as high as they can get.
And that brings us right to the heart of this case. A massive accusation of financial wrongdoing, aimed directly at the former boss of COCOBOD, Dr. Stephen Opuni, and a very prominent businessman named Seidu Agongo.
And this was the number at the center of the whole 7-year trial, over 271 million Ghana cedis. The state's argument was that this much money was basically thrown away on a worthless product, causing a huge financial loss to the country.
So, the whole scandal, all the accusations, everything, it all revolved around this one product, Lithovit. It's a type of fertilizer you spray on the leaves of the cocoa plant, and the prosecution's entire case really boiled down to one simple claim, that the Lithovit being given to farmers was completely useless.
So the state came in with what looked like a rock-solid case, built on 4 main points. 1, the contract was given out illegally without competitive bids. 2, the fertilizer completely bypassed the required testing. 3, the product itself was substandard junk. And 4, a bribe of 25,000 cedis was allegedly paid to Dr. Opuni. I mean, on paper, that sounds like an open and shut case, right?
Well, this is where the story takes a sharp turn. Because over those 7 years in court, that seemingly rock-solid case began to fall apart. And not just a little bit, it crumbled, piece by piece, as the defense started presenting its own evidence. And this right here shows you the first huge crack. On one side, the prosecution was painting Lithovit as totally worthless. They even had a witness who made this wild claim that farmers were drinking it like it was water. But then the defense brought in actual cocoa farmers who called it the farmer's messiah. They even showed that regional managers were begging for more of it because it worked so well.
Yeah, that whole farmers drank it claim, it ran into a little wall called basic science. A former chairman of the COCOBOD board put it pretty bluntly in court with this statement. He basically pointed out how absurd it was to suggest anyone could drink a chemical compound like that. The claim was dramatic, for sure, but it just wasn't plausible.
Okay, so let's move to that second pillar, illegal sole sourcing. Now, this led to one of the most incredible moments in the whole trial. The prosecution's own star witness, the guy on the stand accusing Dr. Opuni of doing this, was forced to admit under cross-examination that he himself had approved a very similar and in fact much larger sole source deal just a few years earlier. Just a devastating moment for the state's case.
So, with the other arguments weakening, it all came down to the main claim that the product was substandard. The state's entire scientific proof, the very thing holding up the whole financial loss charge, was balancing on the results of one single scientific test report. And then, the final pillar just collapsed. It came out in court that the Ghana Standards Authority, the agency that did the test, had used a lab that wasn't even equipped to analyze fertilizer. They used the wrong methodology. The science, the very foundation of the state's case, was completely invalid. So even as the case against them was clearly falling apart, Dr. Opuni and Seidu Agongo were still stuck. They had to endure the slow, painful, grinding process of the justice system for 7 long years. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really shows you what an ordeal this was. The charges get filed in 2018, right after a change in government. It takes the prosecution 3 full years just to present their side. Then the judge retires, pausing everything. It's not until years later that the whole wrong lab thing comes out. And then finally, the state just withdraws all the charges.
So after 7 years, 27 different charges, and a case that was constantly in the headlines, how did this epic legal battle actually end?
It ended with these 2 words. And what's key here is this wasn't a judge handing down a verdict of not guilty. This was the state itself, the prosecution, deciding to drop every single thing. Dr. Opuni and Seidu Agongo were fully acquitted and discharged on all counts.
But here's the thing. An acquittal doesn't just magically erase 7 years of consequences. The collateral damage was very real and in some cases permanent. Seidu Agongo's bank, Heritage Bank, had its license pulled back in 2019. And the reason the central bank gave? This very trial. Even after he was cleared of all charges, the bank was never restored. It's just gone.
And you could just feel the immense weight of those 7 years in Dr. Opuni's reaction right after he walked out of the courtroom. His words weren't just about a legal victory, you know? They were about a deep personal and spiritual vindication after this incredibly long and public fight.
So, the trial is over, but the story really isn't. The complete collapse of this case leaves all of us with some really big, really unsettling questions about what justice even means.
First off, what is the actual price of an accusation? Think about it. 7 years of your life stuck in court, your name and reputation dragged through the mud, and in Mr. Agongo's case, a whole multi-million-dollar business destroyed. All of it based on charges that, in the end, were just dropped.
And what about the cost to the country? Think of the sheer amount of public money and resources, the court's time, the investigators, the state attorneys, all spent on a case that went absolutely nowhere. Who was held accountable for that?
And all of this leads us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. When a prosecution of this size can be launched right after a political changeover and then completely fall apart 7 years later, it really forces you to ask, in the end, who is the law actually for?